You ever promise a friend you'll pay him back for lunch, or tell a coworker, yeah, I'll cover your shift? We make promises like that all the time. But what's the real difference between one of those casual promises and one that could actually land you in court? Well, let's dive into that, because that difference, that's the entire world of contract law. It's kind of like the invisible engine that powers, well, pretty much every part of modern business.
So here's the crucial thing to get. While every single contract is an agreement, not every agreement is a contract. For an agreement to become legally binding, it has to have some very specific ingredients. Seriously, think of it like baking a cake. If you miss one key ingredient, you don't get a cake, right? You just get a big mess. And in Malaysia, that legal recipe is laid out for us, mainly in the Contracts Act of 1950.
So in this explainer, we're going to break down that whole legal recipe. We'll look at exactly what makes a promise binding, and we'll start with the absolute core of any deal, the offer and the acceptance. Then we'll get into the price, or what lawyers call consideration, and all that crucial fine print. We'll even see what happens when a contract gets broken, and we'll wrap up with a really handy checklist for you.
All right, to turn a simple agreement into a contract that a court will actually enforce, you need to have all the right pieces in place. And it's not just one or two things, it's a full set of 8 essential ingredients. Let's break them down. And here they are, the 8 essentials. You can see they cover the entire life of a deal, right? From that first offer and acceptance to the consideration that's exchanged, all the way to the intent and certainty of the agreement. And then you've got the safeguards. Things like the legal capacity of the people involved, their genuine consent, the legality of the deal itself, and any required paperwork. And get this, if even one of these is missing, your agreement isn't a valid contract. It's totally an all-or-nothing situation. Let's start at the very beginning, with the absolute foundation of any contract, the whole process of actually reaching an agreement. This is really all about the dance between an offer and an acceptance. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because there's a subtle but super critical distinction we need to make. Before an offer is even on the table, there's often something called an invitation to treat. Now, that's not an offer. It's more like saying, hey, I'm open for business, why don't you make me an offer? Think about goods on a store shelf or an ad in a magazine. An actual offer, on the other hand, is a concrete proposal that basically says, if you agree to these specific terms, we have a deal. So this brings up a classic question, right? When you see a can of beans on a supermarket shelf with a price tag on it, is the store offering to sell it to you at that price? I mean, it seems totally obvious, doesn't it? But legally speaking, the answer might actually surprise you. Well, the answer was settled in a famous English case involving Boots cash chemists. The whole thing started because the pharmacy was prosecuted. See, there was a law that said certain drugs had to be sold under the supervision of a pharmacist. And the argument was that the sale happened the moment a customer took the drug off the shelf, which, of course, wasn't supervised. The court's reasoning created what we now call the supermarket rule. And here's how it works. They decided that the display of goods isn't an offer at all. It's just an invitation for the customer to make an offer. So when you take that item to the cashier, it's you who is making the offer to buy it. The contract is only formed when the cashier accepts your payment. In the Boots case, that meant the sale happened right there at the counter, under the pharmacist's supervision, and so it was totally legal. Okay, so once an offer is on the table, it needs to be accepted to make a contract happen. And acceptance has to be a clear, unconditional yes to the exact terms that were proposed. And as a general rule, you have to actually communicate that yes back to the person who made the offer. Silence, in this case, usually doesn't count. All right, so we've got an offer and we've got an acceptance. We have an agreement, but we're still not at a contract just yet. We need 2 more crucial elements: the value being exchanged and the seriousness of the whole deal. This brings us to a concept called consideration. In simple terms, consideration is the price you pay for a promise. It's the what you get part of the deal. I give you money, you give me a coffee. We both get something of value. A one-sided promise where only one person benefits, that's generally not a contract because it's missing that consideration. Now here's a key legal principle that often surprises people. Consideration has to have some value, but the law really doesn't care if it's a fair value. As this example from the Act shows, if you freely agree to sell your 1,000 ringgit horse for just 10 ringgit, guess what? That's a valid contract. A court isn't going to step in and save you from a bad bargain as long as nobody forced you into it. And finally, the people making the deal must actually intend for their agreement to be legally serious. In business deals, this intention is pretty much always assumed. But if you promise to take your friend to dinner, the law just assumes you didn't intend to create a legally binding contract.
So you see, context is absolutely everything here. So we've covered the core of the agreement. Now let's just quickly look at the final checks and balances that make sure a contract is clear, fair, and legally sound. These are the essential safeguards. First, the terms have to be certain, not vague. Everybody needs to know exactly what they're agreeing to. Second, the parties need to have the legal capacity to enter a contract. So they have to be adults of sound mind, for example. Third, consent has to be genuine, not the result of threats or lies or any kind of pressure. Fourth, the purpose of the contract must be legal. I mean, you can't have a valid contract to commit a crime, right? And finally, some contracts have to follow specific formalities, like being put in writing to be enforceable. So what happens when someone makes a legally binding promise and then they break it? Well, this is called a breach of contract, and the law gives the injured party a few ways to seek justice. There are three main options, or remedies. The first is rescission, which basically just cancels the contract. The second one, and this is the most common, is damages. That's a monetary payment to compensate you for the losses you suffered. And in some pretty rare cases, a court might order specific performance, which actually forces the other party to do exactly what they promised to do in the first place. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground, from the very first offer all the way to the final remedy. So let's do a quick recap of the most important points to take away from all this.
Let's put it all together. Just remember, a contract is a promise that can be enforced by law, and in Malaysia, it's governed by the Contracts Act 1950. You've got to have all 8 of those essential elements for it to be valid, and don't forget the supermarket rule: displaying goods is just an invitation to treat. Consideration is the price, and while it has to exist, it doesn't have to be fair. And finally, if a contract is broken, the law provides clear ways to get a remedy. And that kind of brings us to our final thought. Now that you understand all the building blocks, think about your own life for a second. Buying a coffee, tapping your card for a train ticket, clicking "I agree" on a website. How many legally binding contracts are you a part of every single day? The answer is probably a lot more than you think.